Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to How to Get Hired. I'm Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. This is episode number 135, if you can believe it, of How to Get Hired. And the title of this episode is How to Answer What Are Your Salary Expectations? So this is a question that comes up not just in job applications, like in a web form if you're applying online. They ask you that question. But it comes up in interviews. So we're going to talk about both of those. As always, a shout out goes out to my YouTube channel members. Membership has its privileges. Also to my Patreons, to my super thanks donors, and to you, my participants. Thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. Hopefully you're doing okay on this beautiful Wednesday morning. At least it is for me here in Winnipeg. Okay, yes, let's talk about this. And also, this is a live interactive Q&A stream. So if you are seeing my face, you should see a chat box somewhere nearby, depending on what device you're watching this on. And get in the chat. And if you are a subscriber to my channel, if you've been a subscriber for any amount of time, you should be able to get in the chat, ask me questions, and I will do my best to answer them for you. That is the whole point of this. This is how I do my Q&A. I don't, unfortunately, I can't really respond to emails or comments and just type out long answers. So I do live streams to kind of handle all this sort of feedback and take questions. So so we're going to start out by answering this question. What are your salary expectations? And then we're going to get into your questions. So let's start this off. Okay, so you are applying for a job. You're on the internet. You're doing it the old-fashioned way by going on the internet and going to a website where they have a job posting, and then you are submitting your application to apply for that job. And all of a sudden, they have these pop-up questions, right? And there'll be usually a couple of those. One of them is often this question: what are your salary expectations, right? Now, any question you get in a pop-up form that's built right into the job application, okay? You know that the way these work is they are go, no-go tests, right? So the idea is that, you can try and submit your application, but if you answer unfavorably to any of these questions that they pop up and make you answer, then usually what that means is behind the scenes, they are not forwarding your application on. So, you could submit it and it looks like it's gone in, but actually, if you gave the wrong answer to any of those questions, it actually stops there. It does not go to a human. It does not proceed any further. You do not pass go, do not collect $200. So that's the deal with those questions. So you want to make sure that you apply, that you answer favorably, or what's the point, right? So usually when this question pops up, what are your salary expectations? They give you a field, to type in your answer. And you can't just write whatever you want. You can't write a paragraph of text. Usually they say, okay, you must give a number. You can't give a range. You must give a single number. So with those constraints in mind, how should you answer this question? Here's what I'd recommend. Okay, usually when they ask this question, they haven't disclosed to you a lot of very important things about the job that would help you answer this question accurately, right? For example, they haven't told you what the benefit package is. If there is a benefit package, that would certainly affect how much money you would ask for in terms of a salary or a wage, right? They haven't disclosed, is it remote work? Is it, is it shift work? Are you required to work holidays? How much vacation do you get every year? Do you get any sick days? Things like this, critical things that, would affect how much money you would take to do that job, right? Those would be factors. But they haven't told you any of that. Instead, they're saying, how much money do you need, without really knowing anything about the job. So what I recommend is you fill in those blanks, all those unknowns. Imagine that they're things that imagine it's best case scenario, okay? So fantastic benefits. You get lots of vacation every year. You get lots of sick days. It's mostly remote work if you want it to be. You have a very understanding boss. There are plenty of opportunities for advancement. You have you're not required to work holidays. It's not mandatory overtime. And all this kind of stuff. So imagine everything that you don't know. Imagine it's best case scenario. It's like a dream job, and then fill in the number. Okay. Now, some answers I've heard for this is some people say put 0. That can be quite risky because a lot of times you see what happens is when they evaluate your answer, they'll have like an upper number limit, like a hurdle rate or a hurdle amount. If you ask for more than that, they reject your application on the basis that you asked for too much money. Okay, they can't deliver it. Sometimes we see that they also have a lower limit where, if you ask less than this amount, that means you're not serious or you're actively trying to circumlocute the question. You're trying to not answer. And they regard that as a hostile answer. We didn't ask you this question for you to deflect it. We asked you this question for you to answer it, right? So if you're not answering it, then that signals something bad about you. We don't want to proceed with your application. So putting 0 in can be risky because you could reject you outright because of that. So that's the trick. You've got an upper limit and sometimes you got a lower limit. So that's why I'd recommend answering the way I did. Imagine every unknown is best case scenario and then put your honest number, what you would need to take that job. Okay. So that's how you answer the question if it's on a form, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Now let's get to how do you answer this question if it's in a job interview. And Rourke is here. Good morning to Rourke. Thank you for being here. So if you're in a job interview and it's like a video interview or it's a face-to-face interview where you could speak freely, even on the phone, right? You have a real-time, two-way conversation. You can answer freely to this question, which means that there's less constraints. You don't have to say a number. You could say other things too, right? So let's get into how to answer this. So why do they ask this question? They ask the question because they want to make sure that, whatever they offer you, you consider that to be good and you're enthusiastic about the job. You're not like disappointed by the amount they pay, because if you're disappointed, it means a couple of things. It means you're not going to work very hard at the job, and it means that you're probably not going to stay in the job very long. So that's why they ask us, right? So it's a trap question, because if you answer this question with a number, they say, what are your salary expectations? And you say this number. The problem is that if you ask for too much over that sort of hurdle amount that they know that you don't, then they eliminate you based on the fact that you ask for too much. Okay, that's the problem. So the tendency is to want to answer with a low number. The problem with answering with a low number is that it's hard later on. If you do get to the offer stage where they make you an offer, they can offer you like rock bottom compensation, very low compensation. And it's hard for you to say, no, I need you to pay me more when you earlier agreed to a low pay, right? So that's the problem. So this is kind of the double whammy. So as soon as you give a number to this question in a job interview, you're dead. It doesn't go well. Either you eliminate yourself or you peg yourself to a low number, right? So the way to handle this question is not to give a number. That's the idea. Once you give a number, then that's it. You're done. So there are many techniques to do this. What I would recommend is a 3-stage process where the first time they say, what are your salary expectations? You say, well, it's too soon to say. Other than the job posting, I don't really know anything about this job. I don't know what the benefits are. I don't know, the details of the job. I don't know, many important things. It's too soon to say at this point. Maybe later we could get into that, right? Now, sometimes that works and they go, oh, okay. And they move on. a lot of times it doesn't. And they ask you again. They say, well, okay, fair enough, but we still need you to give us a number. So you move on to stage 2 of 3. Stage 2 is you say, okay, you turn the question around at them. You say, listen, this job has been posted publicly, officially by your company, right? That means that it must have been approved officially, and therefore the compensation range must have been approved officially. So can I ask what it is, right? You ask them, so what does this pay? What is the range? And whatever they say, you say, works for me, right? So you could try that. That's stage 2 of 3. Sometimes that works, and then they move on. Sometimes that doesn't work, and you need to go to stage 3 of 3. And stage 3 of 3 is where you give a wide range. Okay, so you give, you say, listen, they say, what are your salary expectations? You say, listen, somewhere between here and here would probably be okay with me. Something like that. And those two numbers, the low number and the high number, they're neither of them are ridiculous, like totally out to lunch, but they're a stretch, like you're pushing it. What's a really low number that's still within reason, and a really high number that's still within reason, right? So you say, look, at this point, somewhere between here and here, I'm sure would be fine. That's all I can tell you at this point, right? And that usually works. Now, if they push you more, it's just getting weird at this point. You know what I'm saying? And if they do push you more, by the way, the answer is, what do you do when they ask you the same question again, just as a default rule in a job interview? You repeat your last answer. That's what you do with a smile on your face. You say, well, as I explained, unfortunately, I can't. The best I can do right now is say somewhere between here and here, somewhere in that range. That's all I can say. I can't narrow it down anymore right now. All I know is the job description. I don't know any of the details. So that's the best I can do right now. Right? Now, between all of that, 99% of the time, that's going to be good. They're going to say, okay, and then they move on to the next question. Now, the idea was you didn't give a number. You didn't eliminate yourself because you asked for too much money. But also, you kept it open so that later on, if you get to the offer stage where they give you a job offer, they say, here's what we're proposing. We pay you this, you do this. If you get to that stage, it allows you to ask for a high number if you want. You're not reneging or going back on anything you said earlier, right? You never committed to a low number, right? So that's the reason why I recommend that you answer like that, as I smack my microphone around again. Okay, does that make sense? So that's the question. What are your salary expectations? And I gave you an answer for when you encounter that on a form where you must put a number. And I gave you an answer for in a job interview when you can say something other than a number. And that's why. So hopefully that makes sense. Now we're going to get into your questions. And if anyone has any questions about this or anything else, we can get into it. So Rourke is here. Rourke Ponce says, good morning. Good morning, Rourke. Thank you for being here. Hope you're doing fine. Rourke says, do you think they will always reveal the hiring range if you ask during an interview? No. They never always do anything. Sometimes something works. Sometimes this other thing works. But sometimes it does. So, that's why you make the attempt, right? Okay. Usually they won't, but sometimes they do. I'd say about like 15 to 20% of the time, somewhere in there, that will work. Well, if you turn the question around on them and say, well, what is the range for this position? They will give you that sometimes, but often they won't. That's why you try a couple of different things there. Matthew Harding says, I was recently laid off. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Matthew. That sucks. What is the best way to use my salary from that job as a starting point when negotiating the salary for my next job? Same type of position, same industry. Well, Put it like this, Matthew. Okay, let's talk about negotiating for a second. Unless you have options, you have more than one viable option, it's not really possible to negotiate, right? You can't put pressure on them. Because if your only choice is, if somebody makes you an offer, okay, and you have one offer in your hand, if you were to reject that offer, you have unemployment. Like there's no other good option, right? You don't really have a lot of power to demand anything, okay? Now, what you can do then is the only thing you could do if you want to try and push is to bluff. You could say, well, this salary you're offering is beneath me. I don't work for that little, so I'm going to need you to change that number to this, or I walk. Like you can try and do that, but that's bluffing because if you're desperate for money and this is your only job offer right now, you don't have any other option, right? You have no power to tell these people to go stuff it, if you don't like it, right? You have no choice but to accept it. So if that's the situation you're in, like you need a job and you only have one offer, I would not recommend that you push, because whenever you come back to them and say, no, the salary's not good enough, I need something better, or I need this, there's always a risk that they could say, oh, so you're not happy with what we pay? Okay, well, that changes things a bit, and they rescind their offer, right? There's no longer an offer for you. You lost it, right? By signaling that even if you took the job, it turns out that they were offering you maybe towards the top of their range that they could, and you just said like, well, that's not good enough. I won't be happy with that. That signals that it's not going to work out. So it has been known that, people will rescind an offer for that reason. So it's up to you. I mean, you know how desperate you need a job and you know how easy it is to get an offer for you. It could be easy for some people, could be hard for others, right? The only time you can negotiate, you can actually say, no, that's not good enough. I need you to do this or no deal. The only time you can do that is if you have an alternative. So if they say, okay, then no deal, then you're still okay. You've got another alternative, like you've got another offer in your back pocket or something like that, right? Okay, so that's kind of the situation to begin with before you even get into this. What's the best way to use my salary from the last job as a starting point when negotiating for my job? You see, what you're doing is you're arguing. You're trying to persuade them that they should agree to give you more. Now, you can use any clever argument you want. Sometimes, depending on what argument, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. Depends on the other party, right? A lot of times they'll just say, like, I don't care, how you justify it. But no, we don't want to pay you that much. Sorry. You know what I mean? And if you don't want it, then there's there's a lot of other people who will take it. You know what I'm saying? So unfortunately, that's kind of what you're going to be up against. So what I'd recommend is the solution to these situations is to get pursue a ton of opportunities. Even when you get an offer in your hand, you're still pushing and you're pursuing other opportunities. You're applying to other jobs. You're pursuing networking opportunities, the whole shebang, because you always want more options. More options give you power. You can push back and make counter offers without worrying. If this goes south, that's fine. I got this other thing. But I'm going to push for more. Right? That's what I'd recommend. That's kind of how you handle this. It's a clever argument. There may be validity to it, but the thing about this stuff is that there's no absolute truth. The only thing that matters is, does that convince these people to offer you more? Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, and if it doesn't, you don't want to blow your only job offer over it, is what I'm saying. Danielle Vasquez says, isn't it a disadvantage to fall short just as it is to go long at a minimum you set? Absolutely. I did say that. Especially, that's one reason why, Well, look, I already covered that. The bottom line was that if you, I'm just going to adjust my camera brightness because it's getting brighter outside. This highly technical setup that I have and my command and mastery over my own equipment here. Yeah, I already addressed that. So basically, in a job interview, especially, okay, that's why you don't want to give a single number, because if it's too high, you risk eliminating yourself. And if it's too low, you risk being tied to like a very low number that in the end, if you do get the job, they will offer you so little it doesn't really make sense to take the job. And it's very hard to then push for more because you said you'd be okay with something low. So if you're changing your tune now, what they may do, or they have a higher likelihood of doing, is saying, okay, well, we're going to rescind our offer because we don't like where this is going. You said you'd be okay with a low number. Now you're reversing yourself. That's not a good way to start out. You're going back on your word, you know? So absolutely. So that's why giving a number in a job interview when they ask you this question is bad. That's why you try not to give a number, or you don't give a number. LP Pal says, I think I failed the question on my last interview. On the listing, it had the range, and when he asked this question, I asked, "What are you offering?" He asked again, and I said, "I'll take the base pay," and was very charismatic about it. Well, that wouldn't be that's not failing that question. Okay, so if they rejected you, it was for some other reason. Who knows? Who knows what the real reason was? Rightly or wrongly, they rejected you for another reason. But like that would be the definition of passing this question if you accept the supposed minimum, right? By the way, I'm going to do a live stream about this in the next couple of weeks, but when they give you the range or they tell you the range, a lot of people are sweet summer children and they just take people at their word. Usually it's a lie. Usually like what they tell you the range is usually not the range. That's usually how that goes. Rourke is talking to Alpipel. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, you might have answered this way to this question, but that's not what rejected you. That's not what got you rejected. You could have been rejected because you made a mistake on a different question, or you could have been rejected because these people were effing morons, if you pardon my French. But it wasn't a bad answer to this question because you answered, as far as they're concerned, from their perspective, you answered with the ideal answer, right? You tied yourself to a low amount of money, right? The only time where that would be suspicious would be if you had a salary history of making a lot more and they knew this. Now, most of the time they don't know your salary history, okay? Sometimes they do if you disclosed it to them, right? But if they happen to know your salary history and you just said, well, I'll work for like way below my salary history, the way recruiters are taught to think is that that's bad, right? It's usually bad in the real world. Not necessarily, but often it is. But recruiters are taught that if you give that answer, it's a bad answer, right? See, they're just going on stereotypes. They're making a lot of assumptions about you, and they're just proceeding with that, right? That's why this exchange, like a job interview, is so artificial and stupid. Rourke says, okay, that makes sense. Thank you. You're welcome, Rourke. It begins, says, so I found the range was 85 to 115K. I told them 90K to 105. Haven't received third interview. LOL. Yeah, listen, this is the thing. Like, if you don't get called back, people make all kinds of assumptions. Oh, it was because I answered this question wrong. It could be, but that's a wild guess. You know what I mean? A lot of times the reason why you didn't get the job was because they had to decide between 6 equally qualified people. And so it came down to stuff they would rather not disclose on how, they made that decision. Sometimes it's like, oh, I just got a better vibe from this person. Or, oh, that person is taller, so I think they'd be a better leader. It's like, it's just asinine. I mean, this is the reality of being on the other side of the table. You're not deciding between several people, only one of which is qualified. You're deciding between like several people. They're all, as far as you're concerned, equally qualified, and they all can bring unique things to the role that you would want to have, right? The problem is you can't hire all 6 of them or all 10 of them. You can only hire one. You've got to pick. And sometimes it's almost an eeny, meeny, miny, mo thing. Sometimes there's all kinds of political stuff going on. Well, you got to pick the last person, so I get to pick this one, and I want the one that looks like me. It's random chance is the biggest factor in these, right? So don't read too much into it necessarily. Alpipal says, very interesting. I even said I'd be willing to work weekends and extra hours. Now, there's one thing that enters into this discussion here that is important, and that is that you do not want to come across as desperate, okay? That is a big problem, because it doesn't matter how wonderful you are, it doesn't matter what you can bring to the role, it doesn't even matter like what pay enters into it. If they believe that you're desperate for a job and like you'll do anything, just to make the money, that's almost an automatic fail, because the problem is what they're looking for is they're looking for someone who's qualified, but who actually wants to do this work, like that actually would enjoy the work itself. That's rightly or wrongly, whether that's a tall order or not, that's what they're looking for, right? That's the ideal candidate, right? So that's what they're going to push for. That's what they're going to look for. And they're always going to gravitate towards a candidate that comes across like that, right? So the problem is that if you come across as like, look, I need money, like I need money now, I'll do anything. So sure, I'll work for you. I'll work for the minimum amount. I just hire me, It's like, that's a red flag for them. They don't want that. They want someone that's like, look, I can work many places, but I'd rather work here. I have a set of reasons why I would want to work here. I could pick anything, but I choose this. That's the candidate they're looking for. So if you answer the salary question in a way that communicates that you're desperate, that can be a real red flag. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, LP-Pal. I'm just saying that that's a thing, right? LP-Pal says, well, what if I didn't fail, but they just hired somebody else? Well, yeah, that's the same thing. Like, you were rejected, right? Now, why you were rejected, no one knows, right? That knowledge exists inside these people's heads, and it's inaccessible to you. And that's how it always goes, right? And they want that knowledge to be inaccessible to you. They don't want you to know the real reason, because sometimes the real reasons are just stupid. And to be kind to them, you've got like several qualified people that all could do the job and that all would work well, but you have to pick one of the 6. You know what I'm saying? That's just the reality of the situation. And so sometimes the tiebreaker ends up being something really stupid, trivial and stupid, but they have to find something, right? Jaden Camelot says, does your approach change if you are applying for an internal position at the same company? For example, a promotion. Well, you don't apply for a promotion. If you're applying for a different internal position, no, nothing really changes. It's the same principles, right? The only difference is that you could know the people, and they're hiring you more on, what they know about you, maybe your history with the company, and their perception of you. Because you see, even though you're hiring internally, you might be applying for a job in a different department, and the boss of that department doesn't really know you. You've never worked for him or her, right? So, you know what I mean? Like, they still don't know you. They might have a skewed sort of perception of who you are, an incomplete idea of who you are. But there's also political stuff too. That's the problem with knowing people for an internal position. Like, for example, you're applying for a position in another department, right? So maybe they won't hire you based on the fact that they're associating you with this other boss that they don't like, right? Like, they're peers and they don't get along. They're kind of rivals, right? I don't want any of your people, right? So, usually you're oblivious to that kind of stuff, but that's the other stuff that's going on. You can't worry about that stuff. You have no control of it, and usually you have no awareness of it. All you can do is just do your best, and that's it. These things, the biggest factor in the outcome is always random chance. You're fully qualified. You could do the job. It just so happens that 10 other people applied that are all awesome. They had to find a tiebreaker. They picked something silly, It begins, says, desperation only works on mom and pop shops, not cooperate or like what a co-op or big companies. I don't think it works anywhere, but there's always exceptions. Player 125 says, I had a first interview today in a bigger company as a career changer. I could keep working as a blue collar, but I want into IT. Okay, well, hopefully it went well for you. I wish you the best of luck, Player 125. Danielle, or Daniel, depending on your point of view, says it's gambling at that point. It's on them, really. Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. Spotting talent is actually pretty damn hard. Like, even some of the smartest people in the world that have the most resources at their disposal can't do it very well, right? So when you consider most recruiters, like the recruiter is an entry-level job usually, right? So you've got entry-level people, they're doing it on a budget, and they're using some of these flimsy principles that they're taught. What chance in hell do they have of spotting talent? They don't. It's that's the reality. And they're doing it with totally incomplete information, and they're doing it where they're getting information from you through job interviews, which are the most artificial exchange you're ever going to get in all of business or all of your life, I would even put forward. It begins, says, I'm a PhD candidate at the final interview stage for a research position at a large hospital. Based on so does that mean you work in you're going to work in the pathology lab? Something like that. Based on my references and conversations so far, I feel they are likely to select me. Do you think they might be willing to wait about 3 months for me to wrap up before starting? Possibly. But the thing is, here's the deal. Hopefully you know this already, but just in case you don't, anything that you want, that you want to ask for, you do that at the offer stage. You don't do it before the offer stage. Before they have offered you a job, you have absolutely no power to ask for anything. Okay? Because what's going on is they're talking to several candidates, right, at that time. They're talking to 5 other people and you. So if you start getting I have this want, will, or need, I'm going to need more money, and I'm going to need a big office. I'm going to need, some grant money, and I'm going to need these resources, and I can only work on, Monday to Thursday. And, it's obviously they're still talking to several other candidates. They haven't decided they want you. But if you're starting to play hardball, they're just going to say, okay, well, I'm sorry, this is not going to work out. And they go with one of the other candidates that hasn't demanded all kinds of things, right? That will be happy with the role that they're offering and not push back and try to get more, right? So any ask you have should only come after they offer it to you. Because when they offer it to you, that's when they pick you. They've decided, okay, we want this person. Tell all the other candidates to go home. We want that person. Right? Now you have a little bit of power. You can push back a little bit. You can say, okay, that's great. you know, everything looks good, but if you could just add this or you could change that, then we got a deal. And they'll usually be like, okay, fine. You know, because we don't want to start all over, and we kind of resigned ourselves to like, you are the one that we want. So, okay, fair enough. But you can't demand anything or push back before they give you an offer. If you do, it just results in you being eliminated. So I would wait till after they give you an offer to like ask for anything like that. Like 3 months, transition period or whatever. Tuggy Talks is back. Tuggy Talks says, "Hi Bill, I watched your video on salary expectations. Just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, when formulating the lower number in the range, you imagine it's your dream job." Yes. How about deciding the upper number in the range? How do we formulate that number? Research it to get the average on Glassdoor, etc. Listen, you never have full and complete information. You have to take a guess with these things, and take your best guess. You could start if you like have absolutely no idea what someone in that role could make. Like if that's you're a fully qualified accountant going for an accounting job, but you have no idea what the upper limit might be on what an accountant makes. A start would be like Glassdoor.com, Payscale.com. What's the other one? Salary.com. Like there's websites that have this stuff. It's usually quite inaccurate, but they have information, right? So you could go off that. But the idea is that you push, like the upper limit, you're going to push it up so that it's a very high number. Like it's still reasonable. It's still when people hear the number, they don't laugh. They don't go up, Like if I say I would like $1 million in cash. Obviously that's ridiculous, right? But if someone said like I want 145,000, anywhere between this low number and 145,000 to do this accounting jobs. I don't know what accountants make for different roles, but that doesn't seem ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? So you could start with that. It really doesn't matter because the idea is that you're not asking for that. It's just like an upper limit. And the whole point of giving the range in an answer is to have a wide range. You wouldn't say like, I would want somewhere between 85 and 90, right? That's not what we're doing here. We're saying I would want something between 70 and 135. What does an accountant make? An accountant could make 70. It seems plausible. And an accountant could make 135. Those don't seem out to lunch, right? That's the only thing you do when you give the range. It's as long as it's not laughable, right? But it's a stretch. So hopefully that helps. Good question. It begins to make sense. Thank you. You're welcome. Hopefully that helps. And I hope you get that job. I've always viewed people that work in hospitals in the lab, like in pathology or other research, as maybe unfairly, I always viewed them as like even bigger introverts than me, like extreme introverts. The people that don't want to deal with any other patients or any other people, they just want to stay in the lab, do their technical work all day long. Maybe that's accurate, maybe it's not. It's probably not, but that's how I've always imagined it. Alpipal says, I'm what? Sleighing? Like, is that like Santa's sleigh? Like you're sleighing? It's like a large sled? I'm sleighing, not pulling enough. Everyone else is doing their job. And when I'm kind of crying inside, they really don't want to deal with me. It makes total sense. Like wolf slaying. Oh, you mean like you slew the wolf, right? Not pulling enough. Everyone else, I'm doing their job, and you're kind of losing me on this one. I don't quite understand it. You don't want to deal with me. It makes total sense. If you could let me know more clearly what you're wondering there, Alpi Pal, I'll be happy to. Oh, this moved. Okay, I'm sorry. It says, I understand the frustration of the whole system, but usually I'm not largely frustrated by it. In my last job, all of my coworkers were able to hold their own easily when I was the slow wolf, like wolf slaying, not pulling enough, and everyone else is doing their job while I'm kind of crying inside. They really don't want to deal with me. It makes total sense. Even with that, I don't fully understand. Anyway, let me know if you want me to react to anything there, Alpy Pal. Tuggy Talk says, okay, your explanation on the salary range is mega helpful. Okay, good. Thanks for the emphasis on making it a wide range, a stretch, no laughable numbers. Yeah, exactly. Like you're just pushing it. You're saying like, look, I don't know, somewhere between here and here, somewhere in there would be fine. Like that's the whole point. So you can give an answer, but they can't eliminate you because you asked for too much, and they can't pin you to a low number because you said you'd be okay with a low number. That's the whole point of answering like that. It's a strategic answer, right? It gets them like out of your face. It gets them to move on to the next question and leave you alone, because this question is a trap. Like the salary question is a trap. Jaden Camelot says, I'm a senior cybersecurity specialist. There's alliteration for you. A senior cybersecurity specialist applying for a vacant manager position in my current team, competing with other candidates. Assuming I'm selected, how would you approach salary negotiations? Applying for a vacant manager. Okay. Well, here's what I'd do. Okay. This is me. If this was my first manager role, okay, in that industry or in that line of work, I wouldn't like play hardball with them. I'd take it. I'd get it and then try and do a good job. And then, because your salary goes for review every year. And also if you're truly a manager, like if you're an actual manager, not just like a role that says manager in the title, but you're really not a manager. If it's truly a manager job, you're going to have performance pay. Okay. So some form of performance pay. So I would focus on getting that your first year, and then you can push for them paying you more money in year 2 and onwards. That's what I would do. I wouldn't play hardball right out of the gate, especially if you've never been a manager before. If you have been a manager before in this industry or in this line of work, then you would tie your compensation to that. You'd say like, look, well, I've been in this role before and I got X. You're paying me X minus 30. It's like I'm worth more. I can generate more value. The amount of money I can save or the amount of revenue I can increase in a certain amount of time in a period will more than like double the amount you're paying me, like whatever. So, you make whatever argument there. So that's how I would approach it. Okay. But if they're offering you like a first time manager position, I wouldn't like, turn it around on them and go, well, that's not good enough for me. I'm so valuable. I need way more than that. I wouldn't do that. If just me personally, unless there's some detail that I'm not aware of in your situation. Okay. If it's not really a manager position, if it's like, they say manager, but you're really a worker. You have no decision-making authority or power to do anything, and you just have to do whatever they say. You know what I mean? Then it's just a worker-level job, and you'd handle it the way you handle every other worker-level job, including give some of the answers that I've already gone into in depth in this live stream to the salary question. So hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, there are 24 people here. Thank you for joining me. If you're between jobs right now and you're confused as to what to do and how everything works, get that course. Link in the description box below this live stream. Check it out. That's where all my advice is for how to get a job, not just in the posted job market, which we're mainly talking about here, but also the hidden job market. That's where all the jobs actually are. And it's all where all the good jobs are. It's where 80% of the jobs are, and like 95% of the good jobs are in the hidden job market. You can get them. It's just that you can't discover them with an internet search. And the method to getting them is a lot easier. It's a lot more positive because it feels like a referral, and it's simpler. and there's much less competition. Instead of competing against 800 people or whatever it is for a posted job, you're competing against like 3 people, less than that sometimes on average, you know? So if you don't know about the hidden job market, you don't know about any of those methods, get on the bandwagon, and that's how people have always gotten jobs. That's how people will be getting jobs for the foreseeable future. And I'll spare you the thing that I do every live stream where I go on ChatGPT and ask it about the hidden job market and show you all this. If you don't believe me, do your own research about it if this is all new. Or this is a Q&A. You could ask me questions. We could get into it. Alpipal says, for example, I've been to over 10 car dealerships and was barely able to get not just a fair deal, but one I was actually able to afford. I'm very frustrated by the setup, and I hate dealing with a lot of them, and I almost hate it with a burning passion, but I understand they are people too. So while they are unfair, I'm not going to teach them what to do. Okay? Listen, Alpipal, once you understand what's going on, what their incentives are, and what some of their tactics are, a lot of things fall into place. And it's not so confusing, it's not so off-putting, because their behavior is understandable and their behavior is predictable. And therefore, because it's predictable, you can outmaneuver them. You can play their game and win. Okay? That's the thing. So the key is knowledge. The key is understanding, right? So the idea is that like car dealerships are like an extreme example of, you know, the same principle that we're dealing with in job interviews. Sometimes companies are looking for to fill a position, and the compensation is fixed. It's like, this is what we pay. I couldn't change that if I wanted to. You know, this is what we pay. It's absolutely fixed. You know, the only question is, are you happy with that? Or are you kind of like, meh, you don't regard it as very good? In which case, we probably won't want to pick you because you're going to be disgruntled. You're not going to really work very hard. You know, you're not going to be happy to be here. You know, we want an employee that, like, when we pay this, they think, that's more money than I've ever made in my life. I would be, you know, privileged and honored to work there for that money. And if you pick me, you know, I'd be very enthusiastic about doing my job very well because I'm really happy to be here. And I take this job very seriously. That's the candidate they're looking for, right? Okay. Now, in other positions, there's a bit of leeway, right? And you can assume that, you know, if they do tell you a range, you know, the range is actually this, right? But they'll say, this is the range, right? That's what they'll tell you. When in reality, this is the range, right? That's usually how it goes, right? Now, the thing about dealerships, like, look, you know, what they're trying to do is they're taking advantage of the fact that people haven't really thought through their negotiating position when they come down to a dealership and they want to buy a car, right? They are making their decision based on emotions. Oh, I want that car. I just want it. It's so shiny and good looking, right? You know, it's got all kinds, it's fully loaded. It's got all kinds of fancy features where I press this button. Where it has voice control. When I tell it that I'm having a bad day, these big robotic arms come out of the dashboard and give me a hug, you know, and then I feel better, you know? It's like, that's a killer feature. I must have it. So you go down to the dealership and you say, I want that car. And they say, okay. You know, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to pay as much as possible, right? And they use all kinds of tactics to try and put social pressure on you, right? It doesn't mean anything. You know, if you stick to your number, that's like the only thing that matters, right? I did a live stream on how negotiation works. Like, you have something called a reservation price. A reservation price, if you're buying, that's the most you'd ever possibly pay for something, right? So if they're wanting more than that, no deal. Can't do it. Sorry. right? Now, just like you have a reservation price, they have a reservation price. They're selling the car. Their reservation price would be the minimum amount they'd ever sell it for, right? So it's like a lower limit is their reservation price. They're not going to sell it for lower than that because it doesn't make sense. They're losing money on it, right? And then you have a reservation price where, it's the upper limit, right? So between those two limits is something called a ZOPA, a zone of possible agreement, right? So you can make a deal and it would be somewhere in there, right? Right now, sometimes it's not possible to make a deal because your reservation price and theirs are like this. The lowest they'd ever sell it for is 50 grand, and the most you'd ever possibly pay is 40 grand. There's just no way to make a deal. You can never reach an agreement on that, right? Okay? So that's, first of all, everybody has to know their reservation price. You have to have thought about this. If they say the price is X, before you even get there, you have to have thought, I'm willing to go up to here, but no further. This is a hard stop, right? Now, the thing is, if you're going to try and persuade them and try and make an agreement, the first rule of this is you don't disclose your reservation price. If they knew how far you'd be prepared to go, you'd be at a considerable disadvantage, right? Okay, so like these are some, I don't know if I really have time here to explain everything, but you get it. Like that's kind of how these work. Now, the only way to really sort of play hardball with them is to be willing to walk away. You say like, nope, sorry, can't do it. And then you get up and you walk out. You know what I'm saying? And what I've seen many times is not necessarily in a car dealership, but like in these kinds of situations, is someone will literally do that. They'll say like, listen, this is the best I can do. Can't do what you're wanting. Can't do anything close to it. This is my limit. So it seems like we can't reach an agreement. So goodbye. And they get up and then they walk. And then on the way out, the salesperson is going, okay, wait. Like, come back. Let's discuss it, right? That's the only way you can get anywhere is just by threatening to walk away, they have to believe that you're not bluffing them, right? So anyway, I mean, that goes into negotiation. We really don't have time to get into that right here, but hopefully that makes sense. At least you understand the reservation price thing. That's the same thing here when you're discussing salary for a position, Okay, let's see here. I've been car dealerships. Okay, PB and B on Wonder says, thank you, this is helpful. You're absolutely welcome, PB and B on Wonder. That really rolls off the tongue. I'm glad you're getting something out of it. LPPal says, a lot of them, and almost I hate it with a burning passion, but I understand they're people too, or while they are unfair, I'm not going to teach them what to do. And I feel like I'm not doing my best. I can't point my finger at other people, and I can still do my own niche about the thing. And on top of that, when I got screwed over on my first deal, I was flabbergasted that it's not like grocery shopping in which it's kind of embarrassing enough for us to ask for employee discount. Like, yeah. Like, listen, this stuff, it actually works a pretty standard way. When you learn how they think and what they do, then it's not quite so confusing and stupid. It all falls into place. You can predict what they're going to do next, So knowledge is the key, LPPal. Learn about how negotiation works. Learn about the different incentives for the different sides. And also the fact that there's no such thing as like, an absolute worth. I'm worth this. Everybody has a different perspective on what something is worth, right? In these situations, right? It depends on a lot of information that you may not have access to. For example, you don't know the other candidates that they're speaking with while they're interviewing you. You don't know what those other candidates are prepared to work for, right? That kind of affects what you can get, right? Anyway, Tuggy Talk says, would you please go over the answer to the question, what's the most dishonest thing you've ever done? I just did a video about that. I think that's, I just did a video about that. Or no, I did like, when was the last time you broke the rules or something like that? Listen, those are trick questions, trap questions, whatever you want to call them. They're basically like, how we were talking about earlier, where in a job interview or when they're filling a job, you are competing against other people, right? And the way these things usually look in the real world is it's not like, oh, there's one qualified candidate and then a bunch of duds. That's not usually what it looks like. Usually, the recruiter or hiring manager, they're dealing with a situation where you've got several fully qualified candidates, like any of them could do the job. You wouldn't have any objection to hiring any of them because they could all do the job and there are no real red flags there, right? But unfortunately, you have to decide between these people because you only have one job. You don't have like 6 jobs. You have one. So even though you have like 6 candidates or whatever that you've interviewed and they're all really good, you still have to decide. You have to send 5 home with a no. So they're looking for red flags that are maybe trivial, but these will be the tiebreaker. So that's why they ask questions like this a lot of the time. It's a trap. They say, please give me this thing. And then if you give them the thing that they just asked for, they eliminate you based on what you said. It's a trap. They say, like, please tell us why we wouldn't hire you. Like that's a question some people get. So if you like do a great job at that question and give them all kinds of major issues why they would reject you from the job. Oh, what you may not have picked up on is, I've got like serious drug habit, or whatever, like you volunteer all this and then they go, okay, well, thank you for answering so wholeheartedly, and then they reject you, right? So that's what this question is. So how do you handle this question? You don't fall into the trap. So they say, what's the most dishonest thing you've ever done? You don't answer by saying a dishonest thing. You say like, well, I actually, I'm not really a dishonest person, so I can't really think of a example of me being dishonest because that's not how I operate. I try and be honest with people, and I feel that that's the way forward, and that's why you should have personal integrity, and you should deal with everybody, and it's a sign of respect to other people to be honest with them. It can be a challenge if you're sort of saying something negative, but is honest. You're giving a hard truth or something. But that's why we have communication skills, so you can deliver, even like a sort of a negative thing, but in a positive way, so it doesn't offend people or make them upset. It still preserves the relationship. So you're not falling into the trap. You say like, actually, I don't have that, or I haven't done a dishonest thing that I can recall that would make any sense here. So you wriggle out of the trap. It's like when they say, what's the thing that your last boss did that you hated the most, right? So it's like you've got to come up with some thing that you hated your last boss for. And obviously, hating your last boss is a red flag. It's a sign of someone they don't want to hire. So you don't fall into the trap. You say, well, actually, I got along really well with my last boss. I don't really recall anything that they did that I hated. We actually got along quite well. I think that's the key to, what the relationship with your boss should be in a perfect world. You should get along really well and, not be really, really bothered by their behavior or something. So I can't really be helpful to you on that. I don't recall any instance of that happening. Something like that. That I would always answer like that. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, there's a lot of questions here. This has been moving on, so I got to get rolling here. That was for Tuggy Talks. Tuggy Talk says, I watched the video on it, but I was hoping you could address it here live since you give even more insight on topics. Does that make sense? You could always ask a follow-up question if you need to know more. Alpipal, buying a car is kind of the opposite of a doctor's appointment. At the doctor, you're supposed to be treated with the most sensitivity, if that's the word. I don't know. I mean, I've encountered some pretty officious doctors in my life. Maybe in theory, you're supposed to be treated with respect and everything, but a lot of times you're treated like cattle. You know, you know. I mean, I've encountered some really amazing doctors too that are awesome, but that's far from the standard. Alpipal says, yeah, I've done that. I walked out for $500, but in a lot of cases, they are like, okay, see ya. I don't care about your feelings, which relates to the job thing where I'm struggling. Yeah, well, it might have been it was probably a case of like where the reservation, but there was no possible agreement. You know, they need to sell it for this, and the highest you'll go is this. It's like they're glad to end that conversation because it's a waste of their time. You know, it wasn't going to work out anyway. You know, that's what I would suspect if that's what happened. Either that or the person is just completely out to lunch. And knowing some car salespeople, that's always a possibility looming, you know. Nia Jones says, how do they determine the salary in general? How do you do research if you have a specialization on top of the job title they're looking for? I used to teach a course in university called Total Compensation, where the idea was how they compensate employees. And when I say employees, it's basically workers, right? Not the managers and up, but like just worker, people at the worker level. You know, an entire course on it, and we barely scratched the surface. All you got to know is that there's no such thing as like what you're worth. You know, it's all about what you can negotiate. There's no simple answer for like, I'm worth X, you know, that varies. It varies by many different real factors. And then it also varies by many different factors related to perceptions about you, you know, what your potential is and like all this kind of stuff, right? So the bottom line is that every organization, every employer that hires people and, you know, offers them like a wage or a salary, they have a slightly different way of calculating that based on a slightly different perception of what your value is. So there is no universal, like, single answer to that in a deterministic kind of way. You know, you go one place, they'll offer you peanuts and they'll say, like, you know, minimum wage, that's all you're worth, right? And then they'll work you really hard. They'll whip you hard. And then you go another place and they go like, you know, you're awesome. You know, your personal traits and your potential, you know, with the opportunities that are coming down the pike for people, you know, that can do this, you know, and you can help us with that, you know, and they offer you like a ton of money. You know what I mean? It's just based on perceptions. Some things are real, but other things are more abstract, pie in the sky kind of ideas. You see this also when they value, I'm sure nobody cares, but you see this also when they value businesses, when you're buying and selling businesses. One, you know, they actually train people. You could be in Canada where I am, you can, if you're an accountant, you can get a license, a designation called Chartered Business Valuator. So like, you know, you come in and you decide how much is this business worth? What should be the selling price, right? And, you know, even among those people, they disagree quite notably on what something is worth, you know? So it's all relative. There is no right answer. Alpipal, to switch subjects, I want to talk about honesty. Like you can take the perspective of another view that's not what you think is honest, but is honest for them. Bingo. It's more about acting. Okay, Alpipal, listen, yesterday I decided that I'm going to do a live stream in the next like week or two on the topic of authenticity. I know that might seem boring. I have to figure out what the actual title is going to be, but it's basically that, right? And, you know, you bring up a good point. I want to cover this in that live stream because it's a huge topic. And I see a lot of younger people and less experienced people, you know, sort of making this connection like, oh, that person says this, Therefore, they must think this, and that's usually false. They might be managing your behavior by telling you things, essentially lying, try and get you to behave a certain way that's advantageous to them, right? Now, the other thing is like honesty. If you're trying to sell something, if you're trying to, advertise, or you're trying to promote something, right? You want to talk honesty. Does honesty mean you lead with all your faults? Because I know some people, like I've had in the chats here, that like they say, when I go to an interview, I like to be honest, which means I start by disclosing all of my weaknesses, all of my faults. I say, now listen, I think it's only fair that that, I don't have great communication skills and I don't have a lot of experience with this. I think it's only fair that that, because when we get into it, then you'll be more informed as to who I am. And they think that this is like a good thing to do in the interest of honesty, Now, okay, what happens is they get instantly rejected outright, for the thing they just said. And great, you were honest, but you didn't get the job. Now, is it all like a matter of like honesty or dishonesty, or is it a matter of like making a good first impression and then maybe disclosing other more nuanced things later on when they already know that you're an awesome person, Maybe that's the right approach. So honesty is still the ultimate goal, but the way you go about it is slightly different. If you're making an impression, you don't lead with like, just so you know, I'm a little bit racist, and I hate people that subscribe to this political party and blah. Like, if you started every discussion with a stranger like that, it may not go very well. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has faults. Everybody has negative traits to a degree. If you list them all up front in the interest of being honest, because you've decided that doing anything else would not be honest, you know what I'm saying? I would argue that that's not really the right approach, nor is it practical. There's a lot of people that would really like you, even when they get to know you, but you would have made sure that never even gets off the ground by opening with all your flaws, right? So it depends what you mean when you say honesty. That's the thing. A lot of people have some interesting definitions of that term. Keyword being supposed. I think it's based on capitalism/competition. Well, look, and the thing with job interviews is you're in a situation where they've got one job. They can hire one person. And many people want it. And they have to pick. Right? So you tell me, like, what's the most important thing here? There are many different answers, many different perspectives on it, and I'm not requiring anyone to agree with me on anything. I'm just saying that it depends how you look at it, and depends what your goal is. You know what I'm saying? Some people, one of the more popular opinions is people are going to make the best possible case for themselves and then just see where the chips fall, right? So I'm going to lead with all my strengths. I'm not going to lie outright, but I'm going to emphasize my strengths, and I'm going to try and downplay or not mention any of my weaknesses. A lot of people, their interpretation of honesty allows them to do that. They're not lying about anything. They're not making any false representations, but they're telling selective truths, right? And that seems to have have a good practical outcome. You know what I mean? But other people, like, their whole way of looking at this is completely different. So unfortunately, I can't really speak to that too much. I don't know what the right thing is to do if you think that honesty means leading with faults, or, any of the other things I've heard. I'm not saying you do, Alpy Pal. I'm saying I've heard other perspectives on it. Makes it kind of hard to advise people. You know what I'm saying? You know. Alpipal says you'll meet good and bad people, but the stigma or status quo is basically an immovable rock. Okay. Tuggy Talk says your example on how to answer the question on dishonesty was perfect. It's so great that you give us this insider information regarding the questions and interviews. Knowledge is power. Thanks, Bill. That's an awesome comment, Tuggy Talks. Thank you so much for that. I'm glad you're getting a lot out of it, and you're very gracious to give me this kind of feedback. I really appreciate it. Makes me want to do more of these, you know? Nia Jones says, thank you. Alpipal says, also, I really appreciate talking to you, and I'm very honored. I never thought it's possible to be able to engage with someone so experienced as you. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Helicopter says, Bill, hire me. Okay, well, listen, you need to spell my name with a capital B to start. If you spell someone's name with a lowercase letter, sometimes that's interpreted as disrespect. So just don't make that mistake. Alpipal, is it weird to email businessmen to ask for a business opportunity when it's technically a business inquiry, but it's more of a personal idea? Absolutely not. First of all, you might want to email business women too. I'm just yanking your chain, Alpipal, but you would say business people, right? And specifically, you would say, you know, what role they're in. Like you're talking about decision makers, right? What Alpipal, what that's called is networking, okay? It's a combination of promotion and networking depending on what context you're doing it in, okay? There's something that I have a couple of videos coming up in the next week or so on direct outreach, stuff I've talked about on live streams. It's a very popular method to get a job, direct outreach. That's where you don't go through recruiters to get a job, right? Instead, you go right to the decision makers. You reach out yourself to the decision makers, okay? Now, if you want to know kind of what that looks like, there's a video I have linked in the description box of this live stream. It's called How Successful People Get Jobs. If you're interested in learning about this, go watch that video, okay? If you've never seen this kind of stuff before, that can give you some ideas, okay? I cover direct outreach in this course of how to get a job through direct outreach. It's actually a very, very popular method of getting a job. It's very, very underutilized, and it's very, very effective, okay? It's also relatively simple because what the gist of it is that you find like all the employers around you, like assuming you're not going for a remote job, assuming you're just like looking at a traditional job where you, like, what do you call it? You commute and you physically go there. That helps you limit, like, you know, all the employers you could work for, right? Because if you have to physically be there, it limits the employers you could work for to like the ones that are within commuting distance, right, of where you live. So let's say you decide like an hour's commute. For you, that's like X distance. So it's like a radius around where you live. Now, in that radius, let's find all the employers that have potential to hire someone like you. Okay, so for example, let's say you went to school and now you're a marine biologist. You have a master's degree in marine biology or something, right? So you want to work in some role that's connected to marine biology, okay? So what we can do is we can find all the employers around you within 1 hour radius, all the businesses, all the companies, all the organizations that have something to do with marine biology, you know, or biology, you know, in general, or marine stuff in general, right? We can find all of those entities, right? And you know, the other aspect is that hopefully everybody knows this. Most jobs are not posted. So whether or not an employer has a job posted or not is kind of immaterial. Usually, a lot of them are hiring anyway, regardless of whether they have a job posted or not. So the idea is like, if you know that this company is near you and it hires marine biologists, you could work there. So you reach out directly. You find like, okay, who's the person at that company that runs the marine biology department or whatever, and you send them a message and you say, hello, I'm here. I'm a fully qualified marine biologist. I specialize in this. This is the problem I solve. If you're ever looking for someone that can do that for you, let me know, because I'd love to work for you. And I live close by, and I know you guys do great work in this area. So that's all. Have yourself a great day, right? The idea, it's a very, very simple idea. So, everybody around you who has potential to hire a marine biologist, they get this message. You send them this message, right? Now, most of them, are they hiring a marine biologist right now? No, they're not. So if this goes out to like 500 people, like let's say 90% of them, they're not hiring right now. They have no openings. They're not looking to hire. So it kind of falls on deaf ears. So they most likely won't respond. But the reality is that like a certain proportion of them will be. Either they're hiring right now or they're hiring in the very near future, and this person knows that. So they're like, hey, in a month, we may have an opening. Like this is what they're thinking. So like, this is kind of good. This person just landed right in my lap, So that's direct outreach, and they contact you and say, hey, we should get together. We should talk. There might be something. Let's talk. So, you know what I'm saying? Or they say like, oh, send me your resume and we'll talk further. Something like that. So that's the idea behind direct outreach, right? So Alpipal, you're talking about like, is it weird to email business people and ask for an opportunity? No, it isn't. But you have to approach them the right way. You have to do it professionally. You have to not say things that signal like weirdness or, any kind of red flag. Right. So, yeah, but that is a well-known thing. Now, at the risk of like beating this to death, okay, if you don't believe me on this, okay, I've done this before. I'm just going to do this very briefly. I encourage you guys to do research, and like, as far as I'm concerned, things like ChatGPT are like the very first step to doing any kind of research, just because it's so convenient. Let's see this. Okay, in terms of getting a job, explain the job search method called direct outreach. How can I do this, and is this something worth doing? Okay, you're always at the mercy of what this thing is going to say, but direct outreach is one of the most effective and underused job search methods. Okay, so hopefully that gets people's attention if you don't believe me. It means you don't sit around waiting for job postings to appear. Instead, you take initiative and then contact decision makers directly, even if there isn't a job advertised. Okay, so you can do this yourselves and learn all about it, right? Okay, but the idea is that if you're an introvert and you're not tuned in with like networking and stuff like that, using tools like Google Maps, using tools like LinkedIn, you can do all of this. You can discover the companies, you can discover the people within the companies, you can contact those people, you can send them messages. It's all online if you're an introvert, so you don't have to shy away from this kind of stuff. Okay, so hopefully I've whetted your appetite. If you've never heard of this before, look into it. Now, if you want to learn about it with me, check out that course, because that's like a big part of that course is how to get hired on the hidden job market, and direct outreach is one of the methods that I cover. And I've done it myself. I started up a consulting business using this a few years ago, totally from scratch, not knowing anybody. Okay, let's see, where did we leave off? Tuggy Talks. Alpipal says, usually they never respond. Maybe they're too famous and don't have time for small errands, even if they're nice. By the way, I emailed you again with my business plan. I hope you don't mind. Yeah, Yeah, I'll be covering that on the next episode of Side Hustle Ideas. Okay. I usually don't do that kind of work. I'm not working as an engineer or that kind of thing, but I'll have a response for you. We'll do it live. Okay. It'll just be easier to give more detailed information that way. LPPal says the first step for me used to be Wikipedia. AI is more efficient for that. Also, Zopa is great, not just for money, but for good communication. You don't have to be perfectly understand each other, but can have a good time. Okay, well, yeah. So anyway, yes, look into direct outreach if you're interested in that stuff. A lot of people are interested in job interviews and how you answer the question. That's what I found. It's a bit strange. Less people are interested in learning about the hidden job market or how to get jobs there and what to do, even though it's they hire way more people in the hidden job market than they do, through job interviews with recruiters. You know what I mean? But people are still, interested in hearing about job interviews and how you talk to a recruiter. What do you say when they ask you this question? Stuff like that. So listen, I'm here to answer whatever questions you guys have. We've reached the end of the chat. So if you have anything you're wondering about or you're struggling with, let me know, and I will be happy to do my best to help you out. In the meantime, as I said earlier, check out this course. If you're between jobs and you don't understand how to get jobs or what you have to do because it's not really working, check this out. It's all my advice in one place, including a lot of stuff that I haven't fully covered on my my free videos and my live streams and all that kind of stuff. And if you're looking to get promoted, this is a course for you, especially if you're looking to break into management. Okay, you want a management type position and you want to get promoted up into that and you want to sort of climb the ladder. If that's what you're wanting to do, then check out that course. It's basically a communications course for higher level stuff. And it's where I've put everything that I learned on my journey going from a supervisor to a CEO. So all the communication related stuff I put in there. So that's something you definitely have to tack on to your technical skills if you want to be promoted up into more senior positions. It teaches you how to write, but it basically teaches you how to communicate. And that's absolutely critical to be seen as a contender for a lot of those types of positions. Link in the description box below. Once again, I'm just here feeding off your questions. Hopefully, we got 26 people here, so let me know what you're wondering. Excellent. Okay, so Tong is here. Tong says, "Hey, Bill, hope you're having a jolly week." Yeah, it's pretty good so far. Thoughts on being invited for an interview in a town 3 hours away? Don't know anything about the job, but would be interested if the pay was right. Well, listen, that's a very personal thing. For one person, they might entertain that because it's not really a problem having to drive or travel 3 hours. Some people might even try and commute that distance. I mean, I think most people wouldn't, but other people, it's an absolute deal breaker. They wouldn't even entertain it, right? Especially if they're getting a lot of interviews or whatever, much closer to where they live. You know what I'm saying? So, it could go both ways. Now, you seem to be open to it. There's no reason why you shouldn't be open to it. It usually doesn't hurt much to just go and hear what they have to say. There's nothing to lose for doing it. If you have to take a 3-hour journey and it's really inconvenient, okay, you have to eat that. But if you're looking for a job, you know what I mean? I think it's well worth doing it. You never know where it's going to go. They might even, unbeknownst to you, have a branch office closer to where you live, for all anyone knows. So you won't know until you go there and hear what they have to say. Tong says, is it okay to ask for their interview online? It's only entry level, so I don't think they'd be okay with that. Well, it's starting to sound like a less of a good deal. If you're not entry level and this is kind of a step down. Yeah, like traveling 3 hours. Like, once again, it really also depends on what else you have going for you right now. If this is the only interview you've managed to get recently, then yeah, you might want to entertain it. It's better than nothing, but I agree that that's not ideal, you know? So I wouldn't judge you too harshly if you said like no, or you said like, listen, 3 hours, that's too far away for an entry-level job. Could we do it online? You know, I wouldn't judge you too harshly for saying that. But it depends on your situation. It depends on if you need this or not. Tong says, going to the initial interview, is it rude to say to them, I don't want to hear about the job in person unless it's an online interview because it would be expensive for me and I don't know enough. Now, here's what you would do. You wouldn't talk about, oh, it's expensive for me. That's very negative stuff. You don't say anything negative to people if you're hoping they're going to pick you. Okay, that's the rule, right? But it isn't inappropriate to ask and say, like, you know, I can make the interview if absolutely necessary, but I'm wondering, would it be possible to do the interview online since I'm 3 hours away? Is that something that you guys can do? You know, there's nothing like it's not a faux pas to ask that. You know, it's still appropriate to ask that, providing you ask it in a professional way. And, you know, what's more effective is if you don't signal any negative things. So saying it's expensive for me to have to go there, that's a negative thing, right? And there you go. So that's what I would say about that. Alpipal says, too bad we talked smack about dealerships. I don't think it's too bad. I mean, you know, I don't know. I don't know much about car dealerships. I mean, I know there's some really good ones and there's some really slimy, underhanded ones. It's like everything else, you know? It takes all kinds. And hopefully they're not watching us or we'll never be interviewed again. No, it doesn't work like that. You know, like what, 30 people are watching this? And quite frankly, nobody cares. You know, car dealerships don't care about what I say or what you say on some live stream about getting a job. That's not going to matter. You know? I know you're just joking, but like this, that doesn't enter into it. You know, you have an opinion, you have a question. That's all that's relevant. What you need is a shirt that says Alpipal on it. And then you need a big sign in front of your house, your apartment that says Alpipal that way, and it points to your door. And then you need a massive sign over top of your house or your building that says Alpipal marked with an X, and it's big enough to be seen from space. And that way, they'll know it was you. Okay, we got 30 people here. This is a live Q&A. I'm answering questions, anything to do with careers, job search, anything like that. If you have been a subscriber to my channel for any amount of time, you should be able to get into the chat and ask questions, and I will do my best to help you out. We're just coming up to the hour-and-a-half mark, so we can go a little bit longer. And then there'll be a intermission, and then I'll be back in half an hour from now with another live stream for this afternoon where we're going to cover other HR-related stuff. So I'm just waiting for questions to roll in. Now, in the meantime, as always, I want to encourage everybody to use resources like ChatGPT. This is ChatGPT, right? I don't know if I can undo any of this stuff. So it's a nice clean screen, but you know, you can talk about this kind of stuff. So, for example, if you wanted to learn about, you know, we talked about direct outreach, you know, you could say, so how would I discover employers that are physically near me that, you know, I could work for, that have the potential to hire someone like me? Right? Like you can ask all these kinds of questions for those few people out there that haven't used ChatGPT, that don't know how it works, or they find it's questionable how useful it is. It can help you with stuff like this. If people are struggling with, questions like this, like in terms of how to get a job, stuff like this thing is your friend. It can start you off in the right direction. Does it make mistakes every once in a while? Yes, but it's certainly very good as a general tool. So it's giving you various information here, so you could just ask it a ton of questions. I'm just doing this while I'm waiting for more questions here. Alpipal says, I meant speaking about a 3-hour commute. We need a good car, but yeah, it makes sense. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay. Tong says, what do you think is a good question to ask an HR in an initial interview? When you say HR, do you mean recruiter? I've often used questions about challenges, etc., but the HR will say that's better for an engineer to answer. So what would be a better question for HRs with small, arrogant brains? Well, listen, some of them are arrogant, and some of them do have small brains. That's true. Not all, but some. And the other thing is that recruiters, they're filling a role that like they themselves have never worked in, right? If they're hiring for an engineering position or something like that, they need to hire an engineer. They themselves are not engineers. They never worked as engineers. They might not even know what engineering is, but they're tasked with filling that position, right? Because they are supposed experts at finding candidates. That's what they do, right? So when you go down to a job interview and they say, like, do you have any questions for us, right? You don't want to ask some like highly technical question. You don't say like, well, when you, in your like, polymer lamination process, that machine that you use over there, do you use like a striated lamination, or do you use a compound lamination with ceramic? Because I think that's coming in. What do you use? The HR, the recruiter is going to be like, I have no idea. You need to refer that to an engineer. You know what I'm saying? Like, they won't know that kind of stuff. But what they do know about is they know about the job posting. They know about what they're looking for. Okay. And they know a little about the employer. If they are an internal recruiter, they are an employee of that company, then they'll know a lot about the employer. If they're like a third-party hired contractor that's hired by the employer, they'll know less about them, but they'll still know a bit. Okay? So those are the types of questions that they might actually be able to answer. Questions about the job posting, like the role, and questions about the employer. Okay? So the thing is, when you're asked, do you have any questions for us? On the surface, it seems like you should ask things that you're honestly wondering, right? That's the straightforward, obvious thing, right? The problem is that's usually not the best way to handle this, because the thing is, it's not about what you're curious about. What are you there to do? You're there to get the job offer. You're there to make a good impression so that they pick you, so they give you a job offer, right? That's the whole purpose of this encounter with the recruiter, right? Whatever the next stage of their hiring process is, you want to be moved on to the next stage. You don't want to be eliminated here. So, what you got to remember is that question, just like any other thing you say in a job interview, is a performance. The goal is to get them to pick you, and they'll pick you if you make a good impression. So what do you want to signal to them? Maybe you want to signal that you can do this job. Doing this job is not going to be too much of a challenge for you. And maybe you also want to signal that you're a team player, you're going to come in, you're not going to rock the boat, you're going to get along with everybody, you're going to care about doing the job well. And you have very good communication skills, very good collaboration skills, and all that. That's what you want them to know about you, right? Okay, and maybe there's other things there too. So what you do is you ask questions that signal those things, right? So some great questions you can ask are, for example, you could say like, what's the work style that, people engage in here, or what's the way that people tend to collaborate in this environment, like here at this employer, something like that, signaling that you are tuned into that stuff and that you care about it, right? You wouldn't say, so what does it pay? How much vacation do I get? That signals you're tuned into like what you can get, right? Instead you ask a question more like, okay, so in my first, if I were to be in this role, in the first 30 days, what would you want me to accomplish first? What's like the highest priority that you would want me to do first, right? So like that signals what you're tuned into, what you're thinking about. And if you're thinking like, oh, I want to do well in the job, I want to help everybody, I want to work well with everyone, maintain great relationships, that kind of stuff, that's what you ask about. And that signals good things and makes a better first impression so that they will be left with a better first impression of you. They'll think like, wow, this person, they get it. They're like asking the right questions. They seem to be tuned into the things that we want the candidate to be tuned into. Right? So does that make sense? Like think in these terms, right? Okay, so that was Tong. PJ says, hey, from Douglasville, GA. Is that Georgia? GA is Georgia, I think, right? Douglasville. That's an interesting place. I guess that's where Douglas originally came from, right? Now we know. It's great to have these things, squared away. Alpipal says, I wanted to ask about learning stuff and what you think about mess around and find out, but that's all. Yeah, I've heard a lot of dumb people say that. I really don't know much about it. It's just, you investigate something and you find out, I mean, I would have thought that's self-evident, but, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I generally don't like little slogans or little quotes or like oversimplifications. I don't like when people like rely on those and they like base their entire approach based on this like phrase or something, It's like the reality is that, that stuff may apply. It may be true to a degree, but maybe not universally. There's very few things that are like universally the thing, you should always do, And I've seen people really reduce things. For example, on Monday, I did a live stream on entrepreneurship, and somebody asked me in the live stream, it might even be, was it you, LP Pal? Somebody asked me, is the customer always right? And it's like, I don't like stuff like that because the answer is no, they're not always right. Everyone knows this. But it depends what context you're talking about, Now, if you're trying to sell to a customer, and you want to make the sale, in order to make the sale, you have to listen to them and meet their wants and needs. So in that sense, they're right. Okay, great. I think that's the spirit of, where that phrase came from. But the reality that a lot of employers know is that if you have a very demanding customer that says, no, you need to, in order to sell to me, you need to totally change how you sell. You need to go back to school on how to sell or go back to the drawing board and totally redesign your product from the ground up to meet my needs because that's what I'm going to need for me to buy it from you. What do employers do what do businesses do in that situation? They say, no, sorry. Like, I'd love to make a sale, but I'm not going to go to those extreme lengths to make it. It's just impractical for me. So in that sense, you fire that customer. It's like, look, I'm doing something that thousands of customers are happily paying for because they're getting value out of it. You're the only one objecting to it in this way and saying it doesn't do this. So you're demanding that I totally re-engineer my product from the ground up to accommodate you. Sorry, but that's not something that makes sense for me to do, because I'm not going to sort of, end my business relationship with 1,000 customers just so that I can get you as a customer. You know what I mean? So in that sense, the customer is not always right. You know what I mean? It's a numbers game. So, I just don't like, people always refer to these handy dandy little phrases. They base their entire approach on it, no matter what the context. It usually doesn't lead to success. That's the problem. Little catchphrases. It's like flavor of the flavor of the month management jargon. These little stupid little management initiatives. Every month they'll have like some trendy thing that's like a flash in the pan. Those kind of fall under the same category. Anyway, I talk all about this stuff in like more business live streams. This is more of a job search hiring live stream, so we're going to get off that. PJ says Georgia. Okay, right on. I got that right. Tong, the YouTube commenter, is always right. That's words to live by. Yeah, in their own head. And then their audience leaves, but they're still right in their own head. But I know what you're saying. Alpi Pal, there are very few things that are universal that people should do, the company's expert. Well, yeah, I mean, like if someone says always do this, no matter what the context, no matter what the situation, no matter who you are, always do this. There's very, very few of those. You know what I'm saying? Even if it's something like saying, "Oh, just be nice to people." It's like, okay, I'll throw you in the same room with Hitler and then see if that applies. You know what I mean? Like, you can always find exceptions to anything. And no, I don't want to talk about that example. Rourke Ponce says, I had a boss that used that phrase like this. The customer may not be always right, but the customer is the customer. Meaning if you want the customer to stay, you figure out how to work with the customer or fire that customer. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. That's exactly how it works. Big Daddy says, took a job offer that I wasn't thrilled with, but would keep looking while working. Had my first day and tons of red flags, plus the boss vapes constantly in the office during meetings, quit the next. Yeah, I mean, that's what some people do. And what I'd actually recommend is that if you're on a job search campaign and sort of offers are few and far between, one option you have is to take an offer. Just take it. It's less than ideal, and okay, fair enough. But you take it on the basis that you tell yourself, this is just temporary. I'm going to continue my job search just like I would do before. I'm going to push to do it just like I was unemployed. The only difference is that I'm currently employed while I'm doing my job search, right? That is an option that some people take, right? You try not to get fired from your job because you're engaging in job search when you're supposed to be working or something, but you know what I mean? Like you can continue your job search while you have money coming in, even if it's in a less than ideal situation. So for some people, depending on details, that's also an option. And that's something that, people shouldn't shy away from, right? Sometimes people do the opposite. They hold out for that ideal job that never materializes. They get offers and they turn down the offers because no, this is not what I'm looking for. And it's like, okay, but that can be self-defeating after beyond a certain point, So it makes sense, Big Daddy. And the whole vaping thing, that I was going to commiserate with you. That kind of is a deal breaker. It depends if they vape and then puff it into your face, right? Constantly. People that insist upon getting close to you when they talk, right? Because maybe they're a little deaf or something, or they're a little short-sighted, so they get like right up in your personal bubble, and then they vape right in your face, right? Everybody loves that. That's the page 1, paragraph 1 in the book of How to Be a Good Boss. Alpi Pal says, practice makes perfect, but the more accurate version is deliberate practice. The overload principle makes perfect. Talk about using these phrases as a start, just like using AI as a start. Okay, yeah, well, that's kind of dubious. I would say no. I would say practice makes perfect is one of the few expressions I will use like that, because it's a very important principle in life. Like, for example, a lot of people complain to me, with regard to job interviews. They say, I can't do job interviews, because they tried once or twice and it didn't go well. They go, oh, I'm no good at job interviews. Like, I have a disadvantage. I'm a victim. I'm a victim of some kind of disadvantage where I can't do job interviews. And I say, no, incorrect. Job interviews are like a lot of things in life. We're not instantly good at it the first time you try it. But if you learn how it's done, and then you put in some practice time, right? And you rehearse and you rehearse and you practice, not just with yourself, not just like into a mirror, like rehearsing answers, but you practice with another person, with a friend or family member, doing mock interviews and things like this. You do a lot of them. You'll be good. It's a learned skill like any other. It's like learning a musical instrument or learning a sport. You don't just like observe it, like you watch it on TV or something, and then, go, oh, that looks so easy. I could do that. And then you try and play, I don't know, hockey or something for the first time, and you're terrible at it. And you go, oh, okay, I just can't play hockey. It's like, no. You can play. If you really want to play hockey, you can play hockey. If you want to learn the bassoon, you can do that. But you need to practice. You need to learn how to play the bassoon, and then you need to practice playing the bassoon, and then you'll get good. Job interviews and public speaking and networking are no different. It's a learned skill. Some people, namely extroverts, have slight advantages to some elements because some things come more intuitively to them. But does that mean extroverts are always going to be the best at interviews or always going to be the best at networking? No, they're not. Because what matters more than that is the skill with which you do it. And that's a learned, acquired thing. Okay, so I don't care who you are. I don't care how socially awkward you are or sheltered you are. You can do all this stuff if you put in the learning and the practice. It's just that simple. Nobody is good starting right off when they're young. I certainly wasn't. Nobody is. You got to work at it. So if this is you, this is how you move forward. If you do something like 40 mock interviews, that's 3 or 4 a day for about 10 days, like less than 2 weeks. That's what we're talking. You can kick ass at your next interview because you'll feel so much more comfortable. You'll be so much more prepared, and, answers just roll off your tongue because you've heard all the questions before, That's the way to do this stuff. Okay, where was I here before I went on that little tirade here? Alpipal again. Alpipal is, you're really talkative today. Alpipal says, speaking of hiring, is it bad to say, so yeah, at the end? In my last interview, I answered the question and then stayed silent. There was a 3 to 5 second eerie silence before the recruiter said, okay. Sometimes recruiters intentionally create awkwardness to put social pressure on you to answer maybe a question you don't want to answer. That has been known, right? Or they ask you that pointed question like, why did you leave your last job? And then you answer, and you give like a short, sort of curt answer, and then they don't talk immediately. They let a silence kind of hang to create awkwardness so that you'll feel tempted to keep talking to fill the silence, right? That's a known tactic. Remember, you might not have done that many interviews. You might have done, 20 interviews, maybe 30, 40. Recruiters have done hundreds, right? This is their job. This is their profession. So not all of them, but a lot of them tend to know how to use little things like this to accomplish their goals and get you to say things. I don't think it's bad necessarily to say, so yeah, at the end of something. It doesn't sound super professional, but it's not the end of the world. If you're just speaking sort of more, almost, less formally, more casually, it's not the end of the world. But this is the kind of thing you practice in mock interviews, right? Like if you do a mock interview with a friend or family member and say, like, you don't go super easy on me. I want, maybe try and stress test me a little bit, just because I want to be prepared for this stuff. I want to learn what to do and how to counter these things, Rourke says, I am looking at changing careers, and while I feel my experience has generated skills that translate to other jobs, I have not had almost any interest based just on my applications and tailored resumes and cover letters. How do I present myself as qualified when I've not worked that exact job before? Very simple, Rourke. Hidden job market. Networking. Recruiters look for a very specific, idealized candidate, someone whose entire career has been tailored towards getting this job now. They are a specialist in doing this. That's what recruiters are looking for. The reality is that a lot of people don't have a very linear career path. Some people have work gaps. Some people want to change careers. It doesn't go in a straight line, but you have a ton of transportable skills. You're a highly competent person. You're a great communicator. You're very intelligent. You can solve a lot of problems. You're very organized. You have a great rapport with people. You can go in and figure out how things work and then roll with it. You're highly trainable. These are all universal skills, right? Recruiters are not really trained to recognize or value those necessarily. Hiring managers recognize those. So if you're trying to do any of those things, change careers, come back after a work gap, or you're more of a generalist that's highly capable, but you may not have like tremendous depth in this one role that they're hiring for, but you can still do it. You can still do a damn good job. And you could bring things to that role that specialists can't. You can bring things in because you're a generalist. You've seen a lot of ways of solving problems and a lot of ways of accomplishing things that maybe a specialist hasn't, right? So you can bring all that in. How do you get someone to see your value? You talk to the hiring manager. You do it through methods like direct outreach, through informational interviews, and other methods that get you in front of a hiring manager. Just having a sort of unstructured chat in front of a hiring manager, right? That will do it for you. That's how you do this. And that's usually how people change careers and how generalists get good jobs is usually through this method. So that's the answer. I cover those in this course. Okay, so get that course, or just look into things like direct outreach or informational interviews with a delayed ask. Okay, I did a video a couple of weeks ago, called How I'd Get a Job. And I went through 11 methods of getting a job. Okay, like one after another. So check that out if that would help. But yeah, going through recruiters is not the ideal way, especially if they're in your situation work. Okay, what's this? Alpipal says, deliberate practice is a structured approach to learning that focuses on focused effort and targeted improvement rather than just repetition. AI response. Okay. Daniel says, some companies are willing to pay a little more than they think is appropriate because they know that the location and environment are poor. That's a con on my book as a worker. Absolutely. I worked for a company that paid a 15% premium across the board, pretty much every job from entry level all the way to like C-level, 15% premium over anything else because the environment was horrible. Oppressive, horrible. And despite that, people didn't stay, including me. Rourke Pont says, okay, I will reach out to you about the finding the hidden jobs. Yeah, like listen, whether you do it with me or you do it on your own, that's the way. Okay, learn about that. You're talking to hiring managers, okay, in an unstructured way. Rourke Ponds, I feel that the generalist is what describes my experience for sure. Yeah, you and me both, Rourke. I'm a generalist too. I've worked across 5 industries, you know. I went to university for engineering. I got a Bachelor of Engineering, never worked as an engineer. Now I'm a YouTuber. Am I talking about engineering? No. You know, I've done a lot of things, and then I've been a CEO, and a CEO is like, you do everything. You have to be down with it. It's like the ultimate generalist. You're responsible for everything, and you're expected to know a bit about everything, you know? So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of room for generalists in this world. The problem is that you don't see that when it comes to a lot of posted jobs, because posted jobs, first of all, most of them are at the bottom. And secondly, you know, it's just not something that they do. They're looking for very special things, right? Very specific things. That would be the point in hiring a recruiter, right? Because the recruiter goes out and finds candidates. That's their job. They're paid to find candidates that have a very specific list of requirements. That's what you pay recruiters for. That's their whole job. If you say, well, I need a generalist, so like, you know, almost anyone will do, it's hard to like engage a recruiter to go and find that, because like everybody fits into that category almost, you know what I mean? So anyway. Okay, I have to sign off because I am coming back in 3 minutes. I have another live stream scheduled in 3 minutes, so stick to this channel. I will be live in 3 minutes, and I hope to see you all then. Take care, everyone. You guys are awesome. See you soon.